This video is sponsored by DistroKid, and I'll have more information on them at the end of this video. What's up guys, my name's Will. I'm a session drummer turned electronic producer, and this is where I think my expertise can help take your drums to the next level. If you're not new to this series, you might remember this episode. That's an episode where we take one shots and make them sound way more realistic. Well, I want to do a similar thing inside Ableton's drum rack, but show you how you can apply the same technique to a plethora of different types of drum sounds and grooves. Let's dive into it. Okay, if your drums are sounding something like this, then you've come to the right place. We want to take your sound from this to something a little bit more realistic. And you can even apply that to a different sound as well. This is a lo-fi kit. Same groove, different one-shots, but the same techniques are applied. This means that you can apply it to any type of drum sample and any groove, and within any genre too. So one of the things I bear in mind as a drummer is that when a drummer plays on the snare, there are many places in which he can hit the head. The center of the snare is going to be the fattest sound with the least amount of overtones, depending on how it's tuned. But if that drummer hits anywhere around the edge, there's going to be more overtones and a kind of ringing sound. You also have to think about how your snare is dampened. You're going to get different tones out of the snare depending on what you use. This could be E-rings, this could be mufflers, this could be moon gel, or even a towel, wallet, or tambourine. The same thought process should be applied when thinking about how a drummer plays the hi-hat or a cymbal. Most drummers are going to hit their downbeat with the side of the stick, but then on the offbeat maybe tap the hi-hat with the top of the stick. The closer to the bell of the cymbal they hit is going to cause the hi-hat to sound more pitched up, it's going to be more tine-like, and the lower down on the hi-hat that they hit is going to give more of a breathy, low pitch. So you don't only want to think about groove, but you also want to think of pitch and timbre as well. We'll also come to room sound in a little bit, but let's first get that rhythm in. You're going to want to start with a very basic hi-hat pattern. This is all of the same velocity right now, and then we're going to choose our snare. Make sure that you include the ghost notes in those snare hits as well. And then finally, of course, the kicks. I've chosen 3 really nice acoustic samples, but you can do this with any samples you like. First, go into your drum rack and duplicate the snares left and right as with the hi-hats above. If the kick drum sample has any room sound in it, you might want to just trim that off and add a little bit of a fade. You can see here that I've done the same with the snare drum sound. Now, with the snare on the left, you might want to pull the volume down ever so slightly. You might want to go over to controls and pull the detune down a couple of cents or up a couple of cents. And you might want to apply a small fade, very tiny. I'm holding shift there and just add in 12 milliseconds of a fade. Once you've got more unique drum sounds with the center snare and hi-hat being a little bit more bright and loud, and the surrounding snares and hi-hats being a little bit shorter, maybe faded in ever so slightly, just tiny fractional changes. What you can do is come into that same drum rack, select all of these hi-hats, drag them to the right by half a beat, and then just silence them. With these highlighted ones in the center, you're going to want to drag those up and then just pull their velocity down. This will automatically create a little bit of a bounce, with the first hi-hats on the downbeats being a little bit louder than their offbeat counterparts. As you see fit with the hi-hats underneath, you can start to include little ghost notes. So I'm going to play these kind of at random, just in here. It might not be like the example we heard at the start of the video. We're going to turn these ones way down. With our ghost notes of our snare, we can pull those down onto a second line as well. And we're going to pull their velocity way down too. With any kick drum that falls before the main downbeat, you can also pull that velocity down as we don't hit the kick drum at the exact same volume. What I would normally do here is warp those samples, set them to beats, use the forward mode and pull that envelope down. What I've been doing most recently is automating this envelope pattern, which you can do through a Max for Live device by Holt. It is $5, but if you can't afford that Max for Live device, you can do it by hand by just creating more one-shot samples where you change the envelope ever so slightly for each sample. That Holt device goes before your simpler instrument, and I make sure to copy it up to each of my hi-hat and snare samples. And then what we're going to do is take an LFO device and place that LFO device after the simpler device and then copy it up to all of the channels. Now what you can do is map that LFO device to the knob of the transient wheel, which is linked to envelope here. And you can dial it into taste by increasing the left and right percentages. 50% is of course going to be the halfway mark of the envelope here. I like to turn the depth down so it's not moving too crazy. And I do the same for the devices either side. Let me go over to the drum kit that I prepared earlier. You can see with the snare to the left, I'm applying that LFO just to the envelope here, and the snare on the right, I'm doing the same thing. The snare on the right has been chopped off a little bit, so I don't have as much of the beginning part of the transient, and I've faded that sample. With the hi-hats, I'm doing something a little bit extra. I'm still applying it to the transient device, but I'm also applying it to the fade and the volume of the hi-hat. This is going to allow more of that breathy sound that we spoke of and a little bit of volume fluctuation. With the main downbeat hi-hat, I'm also applying that LFO to the detune. So the detune is moving plus and minus 7 cents to again give it a little bit of fluctuation, make it sound more human. It's important that you recognize that if each of your sounds have come from different sample packs, they'll probably want to be EQ'd uniquely as well. You want as little room sound on those samples, so make sure that they're cut off, trimmed. You've used the beats method to trim off any of that excess decay. But EQ the lows out of the hi-hats if they need it. Make sure that the snares are nice and poppy and the kicks are focused in the low end of the EQ. You can see that that's mirrored here with my hi-hats, the EQ8 sitting there. With my ghost note snares, I'm taking off some of the low end with the EQ, but I'm also adding another LFO device, which is sitting on node 8 of the frequency and just fluctuating some of that sound, again, seemingly affecting the pitch of the snare. You can see here with the third row of snares, which we hadn't yet got to, I've included a few more ghost notes. Sometimes these fall with hi-hat markers or kick drums, and this is going to make these tiny little kind of fluctuations to the beat, which I only add after I've added all the Holt stuff. At this point, I like to add a clap or a tambourine, as I've done in this episode, on beats 1 and 3. This is going to accent the snare a little bit and make it sound like there's accidentals in the recording. Maybe one of the band members left a piece of percussion on an amp and that's getting picked up in the room mic. It all goes into making a more realistic drum sound. From here, it's really important that you think about levels. So I adjust my one-shot levels accordingly, making sure that the snares aren't too loud and the hi-hats aren't too overpowering. I make sure to pan some of my drums from the drummer's perspective, keeping the kick and snare central, but some of the ghost notes just a little bit left. I like to pan my percussion to the right alongside like a ride cymbal or crash, with my hi-hats falling just a little bit left of the snare. Finally, and all in keeping with making a realistic drum sound, is the fact that you put it in a physical space. All of these one-shots have come from different physical spaces if they haven't been made electronically, but they probably have been mixed, mastered, and maybe have a little bit of reverb applied. Now that you've trimmed those things off, they're probably all sounding a little bit odd. So you want to add that reverb, that room sound back into your recording. A quick way to do that in the drum rack is open your chain list, open input output, and make sure that you have a reverb that you like at 100% wet on the return. From here, you can click sends and start to send your snare level. I start with the main snare because this is probably going to be the loudest amount of reverb that you're sending. I create a rule for myself that the snares either side won't go as much into the return as my main snare. The same kind of goes for my hi-hats. I'm applying just a little bit of that return reverb, and the main hi-hat being at -41, with the hi-hats either side being less than that. Doesn't matter too much for the percussion because it's way in the back and we just want that an almost atmospheric layer. You can even apply a very small smidge of reverb to the kick drum. This is much debated online, but if you ever think about a live recording in a recording room, unless it's a completely isolated chamber, there is always going to be a tiny little bit of delay and reflection of that room. So why not add it into your mix? Just make sure that you're EQing things after that reverb. So I get rid of all of the low muddy stuff and all of the extreme highs after my reverb. This is going to make for a more realistic recording. And from there, you can apply the devices to glue your drums together and give them that analog sound, as if you're running it back through a desk and completing the process. I like to add drum bus first, add a little bit of drive, some medium compression, turn up the crunch a little bit and pull those transients down just a little bit if you want to shave off a little bit more of that excess kind of overtone. Something like Studio Verse by Waves is great because it can run you through a bunch of different presets that might work for drums or any other sound that you have. I've adjusted one of the presets from scratch, adding a little bit more kind of crack and compression and buzziness to my sound as if it's been run through an analog desk. If you don't have this, you can use something like RC20 or anything by the Excite Audio guys to make sure that it has a little bit of that distortion and warmth. I just apply a limiter at the end so it's not too loud and you're left with this. But we can apply that exact same concept to the same groove, just with different drum samples on a new drum rack. These are all lo-fi drum samples, but it is the exact same groove. I hope that was helpful. If you downloaded that Halt device, you can head over to my Patreon where you can download this project so you can kind of break down the template and then apply your own drum sounds from scratch. Big thanks to DistroKid who sponsored this video. Did you know that 1/3 of the world's music is released through DistroKid? Yes, this is because of its ease of use, its affordable yearly fees, and its unparalleled promotional tools. If you want to start releasing your music with DistroKid alongside me and a plethora of other musicians and artists, then just use the link in the description below because you'll get 7% off your first year. Thank you so much for swinging by, guys. Don't forget there's bonus material over at the Patreon. I hope this video was insightful and helpful. Let me know in the comments what you want to see in future videos. For now, I'll see you next time.